What's up, Mythic Legions Cabal? Started tonight with a little flyover, giving you a little sneak peek at some of the stuff we're going to look at tonight. Hello, everybody. It's Wednesday night, so you know what that means. It's time for another Mythic Conversations. Thank you all for joining. If this is your first time joining in on this broadcast, let me start by introducing myself. My name is Jeremy Gerard. I'm a Mythic Legions collector and customizer. I also have the distinct pleasure of working with Four Horsemen Studios as the digital marketing director and responsible for everything at sourcehorseman.com. If you want to see more of my work and the customs that I do, a lot of the stuff we're going to look at tonight, all you need to know is the name Mythic Customs. I post as Mythic Customs, all one word, on Instagram. I post something new every single day. You can also see all of my customs, including recipes for the work that I do, at my website, which is also mythiccustoms.com. And actually, these videos, I broadcast this live every Wednesday night at 7:30 here on the Cabal. If you can't catch it live any particular week, not a problem. I repost the video to the Cabal, and I also repost it to YouTube, where you can find me. That's right. If you look up Mythic Customs, you'll find me on YouTube as well, and these videos are there. So once again, thank you for everyone joining. Larry, Chris, Mike, thank you. Anthony, thank you all for joining. Everybody, very nice to see you. Eddie, Steve, got my Legions cast shirt on. Check this out, how awesome this is. Steve just joined. The guy sent me this awesome shirt that I can rep for the show tonight. So it's so comfy. Feels like I'm being embraced by Steve, Pete, and Travis. It's just a wonderful feeling. But in all seriousness, thank you for joining. Something pretty cool to talk about tonight, I think. Like most weeks, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the world of Mythic Legions. Kind of go through some of the stuff, have some chat there. I do have, like every week, some customizing tips and things to talk about tonight. We'll do that. And as always, this is called Mythic Conversations for a reason. It's a conversation. There's a live element to this. There's a chat element to this. As you post questions along the way, I will be happy to answer those questions, to respond to those comments, and really spend the next 90 minutes or so talking about this toy line that we all love, Mythic Legions. So let's see what we've got going on here. Like most weeks, everyone's just kind of saying hello. Anthony saying, nice shirt. I know. Where's mine? Mike said. Contact Legions Cast. Contact those guys. I think they're going to be doing something with these shirts. I don't want to speak for them and tell exactly what their plans are, but I've got mine, and that's what's most important. A lot of people saying they like the shirt. So Legions Cast guys, you got to get on that. Your fans are asking for this. So what's going on in Mythic Legions? I think the biggest thing was probably this past weekend. They had the ZoloCon show in Pennsylvania. I was unable, unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to that, but all the photos I saw online, all the recaps, my friends that were there that told me about it, talking to the Horsemen, everyone said it was a great, great time. And it seems like the Horsemen actually had some really cool stuff at their booth. I knew they were going to have figures from Siege and from Wasteland, which are the last two waves that have shipped. But they had a bunch of trolls there. I saw people picking up some of the Brontis Coliseum troll, some of the Ice troll. They had some weapons packs. I saw people picking up some weapons pack 3 sets, which that's the one that has the Aether Blade and the Heavens brand in it. So that was super cool. The fact that they brought out some of the older stuff like that they had hanging around the shop. Everyone seemed to have a great time, and especially for those of you who were able to make it out to what they called the Legionnaire lunch. I've been talking about this on the show the last few weeks, kind of promoting it for my buddies Anthony and Len, and it looks like they had a really good time. Cornboy came out as well, and he was able to join the conversation and hang out at the restaurant, so that was really cool. And one thing that was really neat was, if you went to this, I don't know, I haven't seen a lot of people talking about this online, but Len actually surprised attendees at Legions Con lunch with a couple little printed pieces that he did. So he did this little knife here. It's like this little skull handled blade. And then he did this little mug, and you probably won't be able to see very well on the camera here. It's not going to focus in enough, but it actually has a ZoloCon logo right on that little mug. And there's actually says ZoloCon on the knife too. And he gave these out free to all the attendees at the Legionnaire lunch, and he was nice enough to send some to me as well for the work I've been doing, helping raise awareness and promote it the last few weeks. So that was super cool, the fact that people got to do that. Len is doing stuff with this, very creative guy. He's been doing stuff with the 3D printing. And honestly, stay tuned for that. He's got some cool stuff coming up. To give you a little sneak peek, he actually reached out to me. I met Len for the first time last year at Legions Con, and I knew he was a fan of the My Wife Is Gonna Kill Me podcast crew. He was there with Anthony and Cookie, and they were just fun guys. They were really cool. I talked to him a little bit, and I've talked to him a lot more since. And he's got some cool stuff that he's cooking up that he's asked for a little bit of my help with, some design help and some painting help. And I love designing figures. I love designing customs and thinking about how to make different characters. So I was really excited for some of his thoughts. And not to get too deep into that, but that's something that I'm telling you we're going to be looking at in coming weeks, I'm sure, as he has stuff to show. So ZoloCon, yeah, great time. Everyone seemed to have a good experience. Walter says he's at the gym while watching this. Walter, how you doing? Anthony, I'm a Brontis owner thanks to ZoloCon and Len. Yeah, Brontis is great. The fact that they had him there, I know a lot of people still looking for them. So I tell people all the time, get to the shows. If you can get to one of the shows that the Horsemen are at, that is a great way not only to meet them, and they're such cool guys, just sitting there and talking to them. There's no substitute for that, but you can pick up some great stuff at the table as well. Walter actually says Len is working to make a new Cabal shirt for the group as well. Stay tuned for that. Yeah, that's something that we're working on as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I know a couple weeks ago, I think it was, or actually, I think last week I wore the Cabal t-shirt that we did a limited run of that last year in November, right before Legions Con. But we've had a bunch of people ask us for more t-shirts. We're not doing the same design. Walter's gonna, come up with something new, but stay tuned for that as well. So what else has been going on? All Stars 3 is still going on. Obviously, that pre-order is open. One thing that's pretty cool to be aware of, myactionfigurecustoms.com, the 3D printed materials they put out. Rob, who runs that, he's been posting all this week some teasers of what to expect for a sale that's going to be coming up. I think it's actually this Saturday. And one of the things that he's doing is a re-release of something he's done in the past. That is the vampire heads, both the kind of relaxed face and the, angry, snarling type mouth open head. And that is a great head. We talked last week, we looked at some of the figures from All Stars 3 and the customization options that you could have for those. And I had mentioned you can put some new heads on those. That's a great head to put on that Baron Valigar. They aren't selling them painted. They are selling them unpainted. I did see some people ask him if they would be painted. He's already done a few, I guess, painted sales for that. So he said there's no plans for a painted sale for that. But at the very least, the unpainted ones will be available. And if you really can't paint, I'm sure there are people on the Cabal that would take the commissions for something like that to paint those up for you. So you can always reach out on the Cabal and ask for that. But keep your eyes open for that. Stuff does sell out. So, you do want to get in. The go live is sometime on Saturday. You can check them out, myactionfigurecustoms.com. And they have a group here on Facebook you can follow as well if you want more information on that. So let's see. Following up on a question I had last week. So last week, someone asked me what kind of glue I use. And I didn't have it with me. It was in the back, but I said I would come back to that. So this is the kind of glue I prefer. The brand is Crazy Glue, and they have a number of different kinds. But this particular configuration with that tube, That's the one that I really like. This little, the bottom kind of pops out, and you can fit the tube right in the bottom, so I can, as I'm gluing, I can rest the tube on the table and have it stand up. This is what I prefer. I also find it doesn't come out super fast. I can control the flow. This is another one I've tried. And this one, it says Duro. This is really cheap stuff. I find this one to be so liquidy, and I just happen to have this tube and back still as an example. I've had others that I felt were very liquidy as well. I feel like they just come out and it drenches the area, and it actually destroys what I want to do. So this is the one I use to answer that question. Let's see what we got for questions. Steve saying I need the Aerothere blade. Yeah, that's one that a lot of people have been looking for. There's a version of it coming out with actually Aerothere. When the Aerothere figure ships, he's got that blade, but it's got like flame effects added to it. I'm honestly not sure if the flames are removable or if they're attached. When I saw it at the studio, it was G-Con, and it needed to be on camera. There was no way I was going to pick that up and start fiddling with it for fear of breaking it before it had to go on broadcast. So G-Con was very much a look and don't touch experience for me. Didn't want to do something silly. Chris, yeah, you asked the question, so yeah. Yeah, Walter said I use crazy glue as well. Nikki's joined. Hey, Nikki, thanks for joining. So actually, we can get right into this, and along the way, I'll be answering questions. But one of the things, what I want to talk about tonight was actually adding new heads to Mythic Legions figures. And it's funny because I plan out, I don't have a script here. I have some topics I want to cover, but I do plan out the topics I want to speak about on any given show. And I actually have a list of all topic ideas that I have for the show. So I can, any given week, I can start planning, okay, what am I going to talk about next week and the week after? I want to be thinking about this in advance, so I understand which figures I want to show and exactly what points I want to hit, or if I'm going to do a tutorial, what things I want to show and what materials I need for that. So when I started thinking about doing heads, I was like, yeah, it's a pretty basic concept. But one thing I'm starting to realize is some of those basic concepts are really what I'm finding the Mythic Legions community wants to hear more about. And case in point, so as I said at the top of this broadcast, I do all of the content for sourcehorseman.com. I posted an article just last week or so about the wing adapters that came in all like the Advent of Decay figures. And it's really funny because I had started writing that article like 6 months ago. I had an abridged version of it that I was going to post on my Instagram page, really just as a FAQs kind of thing, because I saw a lot of new people getting the figures and asking that question, what are these 3 little pieces of plastic? So I was going to do that, but then when I started working with the studio and working on the website, I said, you know what, that's actually a good topic, that's a good blog article to put on the website. So I wrote the article, and I honestly didn't think it was going to get a lot of attention because it's back pieces. It's something that many of us have so many of. I have bags of those things in back. It's ridiculous. I thought it was common knowledge, but the amount of people that have reached out to me since I posted that, or posted on, the article I posted on the groups, saying that they appreciated that article, very much surprised me, especially that last little tidbit that I put in there about using a back piece to add 4 arms to a figure, and I showed a skeleton. I've seen a number of people use that configuration to make themselves some 4-arm skeletons. So that is cool. That's why I post those things. I'm happy people enjoyed it, but it also made me realize that, some of these common topics, like how to add heads to Mythic Legions figures, I shouldn't take it for granted that that's common knowledge. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And I started thinking about this topic, and realistically, when you're going to add heads to Mythic Legions figures, there are 2 basic things you're going to use. There are 2 basic options. You're either going to add a head from an existing action figure, like a fully painted head from one toy line, you're going to add that to Mythic Legions, or you're going to use one of the custom heads that this awesome custom community has sprung up, doing 3D printing, doing custom casts of these different heads. Those are your two options at a really high level. So I started thinking about that and what I was going to cover and what I was going to show, and I realized it is a huge topic. There is a ton of stuff I want to show and I want to talk about. So I said, why don't I split it into two shows? So you are witnessing the first ever two-part Mythic Conversations episode. Today, we're going to talk specifically about how to add heads from other toy lines to Mythic Legions. And then next week, we're going to have a to be continued at the end of today. And next week, we'll actually look at all of those custom heads I mentioned, the 3D printed stuff, the cast stuff from a bunch of different artists. I'm very fortunate. I have a ton of that stuff in my collection, so I can show you a lot of it. I can talk you through some of the things that I've noticed, some of the experiences I've had. So as you're getting into this, you kind of have that knowledge as well, that information. Sound cool? A lot of people saying hi. Tim is saying, at least I'm prepared, unlike Legion's cast. Ooh, Tim, aren't you supposed to be watching wrestling right now? You always say that you have to catch this in repeats, like in the rebroadcast, because you watch wrestling. What's going on? Did I jump ahead of wrestling tonight? Or is wrestling just not on yet? That's probably it, right? So Walter says he has hundreds and wants to make an adapter's throne. Walter, I got to show you how many I have. I got to take a picture of it. It's pretty funny. So adding heads to Mythic Legions. This is probably the easiest way for you to start customizing. It's how I started. My first experience with adding heads, with doing customs was just adding heads. It's a great place to start to add some variety to your legions. I've seen a ton of people do like with the Templars, where they've got a display of the Templar Legion builders, and they all come with the bucket helmet. So they start adding some heads, some like unmasked heads on them to create some variety for their Templar display. That's a great way to add some variety, and it's actually pretty easy to do. So what we're going to do tonight is look at these other toy lines that you can use. Some of the stuff I'm going to show is things that are super common, things that are pretty easy to find, things that you've probably seen a lot of other customizers add from a lot of toy lines. But I've also got a lot of really obscure stuff in here that I'm going to show you tonight, probably from some toy lines that you've never heard of. And that's one of the cool things, because these are 6-inch scale, there's so many other toy lines out there that you can draw from to create some cool stuff. Along the way, I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about how to Dremel heads. So when you have heads that don't fit because they're too small, how to make them larger. And if you have heads that are too big, how to make those fit as well. And like I said, along the way, I will answer questions. So the easiest heads, the first line I'm going to talk about, the easiest heads to swap onto Mythic Legions are Mythic Legions. These things are made to be swappable. The heads are made, they come with multiple heads in a lot of cases. They're made to come off. That is an easy way to start. And again, that's how I started. Back when Mythic Legions 1.0 got released, remember, this was before I was customizing. There was no Mythic Legion, so I hadn't started doing all this. So when I ordered my 1.0 set, I went all in, but I didn't order a ton of extras for customs. I did order a few specifically to do some part swaps, though. This was the start of customizing for me, and I didn't come up with this recipe. I actually saw someone post this on probably the old, Source Horseman forum that used to be there. I saw someone post this, and I said, that's really cool. I'm going to do that. They had posted this, the blood armor with a Carpathia's head. Super simple. This is literally just take a blood armor, pop the head off. So you've got the little head peg. Actually, that's the wrong head peg. It's in there right now. The other head peg is in a custom head. I didn't want to pull it out. But you have the head peg there. Pop the other head on. Boom. Super, super simple. 5-second custom. But it looks super cool. This is one of the first things I did. And you can do this with your Mythic Legions. They come with extra heads. Take advantage of that. Swap them around. Another super simple one You take a skeleton Legion, a Templar Legion builder, you pop a skeleton head on that, there you go. Super, super easy undead Templar custom. You could go a step further. You could swap out some of the bones, the bone legs, the upper legs and upper arms, if you wanted to, do even more here. But again, this is a couple seconds. That's a Pix's head on top of, a Templar Legion builder body. I actually think it's one of the newer ones. I think it's kind of a combination, but in case you get the point. Very, very simple. That is a great way to start. Obviously, you're going to get to a point pretty quickly where you're going to start saying, you know what? I think I want to start looking at some other lines. The first line that I started using was Masters of the Universe Classics, MOTU. It makes a lot of sense. So it's a fantasy, sword and sorcery kind of line to begin with. It's got a similar aesthetic to Mythic Legions, and the Horsemen worked on all these figures. So they've always felt to me like kind of cousin lines, where a lot of there's a lot of MOTU stuff that doesn't fit. There's a lot that's a little too cartoony. And I'm not even talking about like the Filmation stuff that's legitimately cartoony, that's because it's based on a cartoon. There are definitely some that just, they don't fit. But there's others that I think work wonderfully well. So the thing you will have to know though, and I'm going to show you a bunch of MOTU figures, MOTU heads I've used. The thing you do have to realize is this is an example of where the heads won't just pop right on. So Mythic Legion's head they'll just pop right on. As long as you're swapping heads within the same body style. So with Mythic Legions, you have what they call kind of the 1.0 bodies. Those are the bigger bodies, the barbarians, the male orcs, the larger of the skeletons, the dwarves. Those are all the larger. They have larger neck pegs. The other versions are the figures that debuted in Advent of Decay. So these are the females, the elves, the goblins, the thinner figures. Those two heads are not compatible. You can swap them. The heads from the 2.0 stuff are a little smaller, so they really won't fit on the 1.0. You could go the other way and use a little bit of what I'm going to show you after to make it fit. But by and large, because they're kind of different sizes, they don't swap that well anyway. I've seen a couple people do a few of them. They look a little off in terms of size. But if you're swapping within the 1.0 style with 1.0, 2.0 with 2.0, they pop right on. That doesn't happen if you use MOTU. So you probably aren't going to be able to see it perfectly, but you can see that the head area, the little ball, there should be the little socket that you would plug into, it's a lot smaller on MOTU than it is on Mythic Legions. You're going to find that with pretty much everything. Pretty much every line that I've used to swap onto Mythic Legions, I have found that the holes are smaller. So what you're going to want to do is expand that hole by dremeling it. I've seen a ton of people get so worked out, they're so afraid to Dremel. It's not a big deal. It's not hard. You don't need to be worried about this. I'm going to give you a couple of tips on how to do that now. Sarah's saying, I love putting Marvel Legends head on Mythic Legions. I'm going to talk about Marvel Legends in a minute because I don't really care for Marvel Legends. I've got a couple of them, not my favorite, and I'm going to talk about why in a minute. So hold up for that. Jason says, my wife and I are thinking about getting into customizing, and what you're doing with this show is fantastic. Awesome. I hope this inspires you to do so, and I hope some of these tutorials give you the tips that you need. It's also why I save them all, so if anyone has to go back and watch it, that'll be helpful too. But thank you for that comment. So this is a Dremel. This is not an expensive Dremel. You don't need to spend a lot on this. This was like 20 bucks, and I probably got it 10 years ago. It has been my workhorse. It's lasted me for a really, really long time. It's a super simple one. It's got 2 speeds, low and high. Super simple, okay? Removable battery. This just plugs in, charges, plug it right in, okay? I also have, you can buy attachments for it because you can get different pieces that grind and cut and sand and all that. I have found that if you buy the attachments separately, they get a little pricey. I picked up this at, and it's catching a glare. There we go. I picked up this at a Home Depot. Okay, it's funny. It says $90 value, $90 value, 108 pieces. I think it was 20 bucks. It's got a ton of attachments in it, a bunch of attachments I'll probably never use, but it's okay because there was enough in there that it still made sense for me to buy that. The attachment that I have in here, it's a little grinding attachment. It's so hard to get that to focus. And that's not going to focus, but it's a little ball attachment, kind of a little cutting attachment. This is the one that I use all the time. And what you're going to want to do is you basically want to turn this on, and you want to go around the lip of that hole, right around the lip of that opening, to just, you know, cut the plastic and widen it and open it up. It's not hard to do. I will give you some tips. So when you start drilling in there, dremeling in there, because this is moving. So remember, as you put that in there, it wants to kind of kick out, okay? You don't want that to kick out and hit your figure, okay? It's happened to me a lot of times. What I do is put your thumb over the face. When you hold this in your hands, okay, the area that's against your thumb, make that the area, the facial area. That way, if the Dremel kicks out, it's not going to hit. It's going to hit some of the stuff that's around the edges. It's not going to hit the really delicate facial area. And I've had that happen. I've been dremeling a figure and the Dremel kind of jumps and hits right across the face. And I've ruined heads like that, which sucks. It's horrible if you've actually bought a head on like eBay or something. You know, you can find a lot of MOTU heads on eBay just as the heads. I've bought lots of heads. People customize MOTU figures all the time, so they end up with lots of extra heads. It stinks when you have a head and you do something like that and you mess it up, and then you basically, it's ruined, because there are times where it's legitimately gouged and it's ruined. Depending on the head, maybe you can make that battle damaged or something, but there have been times it hasn't worked for me. So that's a trick I've learned. I actually cover that with my thumb, and then I'm not going to do this here because it makes a horrible mess. That's one thing to understand. This isn't going to be something you want to do in a nice area. I do this in my garage over a trash can, because the plastic is going to literally start just coming out. And these are, the plastic heads are actually easier to do. If you ever have to do this to any of the custom like cast heads that we're going to talk about next week, those things just, it's like powder that pours out of it. Those are even worse. These, the plastic will just come out, but I don't want to do it all here and make a mess. But ultimately, I would just turn this on, and I'm just going to very, very carefully go around the ridge, and I'm going to expand it. I'm going to make it larger. And as I start doing that, I'm going to have my figure next to me. And remember, you can always take more off. So I'm going to start, and then I'm going to try to fit it. Nope, it doesn't fit. I go back and I do a little bit more. Boom, boom. You'll get to a point, if you do enough of these, that you kind of start to know about how much you have to do. In a perfect world, it's going to give you a nice snug fit. You're going to have enough that you can, boom, pop it on. If it sits too high, like if it fits but it sits too high, then you can, instead of going around the lip of the hole, you can go a little bit deeper and try to get some of the plastic that's between the top of the head and the opening. You want to get some of that out, okay? That's going to sit a little bit more there. So dremeling is not something you should be afraid of. You can honestly buy a Dremel in a kit for, you know, under 50 bucks, and it's going to be a workhorse tool for you. If you're going to start doing a lot of this, especially if you're going to do what we're looking at tonight, and you're going to add heads from other toy lines, you are going to want to get one of these. Now, what happens if you do too much? And it certainly happens where you Dremel a little too much, and then you go to put the head on and you don't get a snug fit. It's super, super loose. This is where I use something called blue tack. Well, I think that's what I call it. This piece here is also how you would put a head onto a body that is larger, okay? I don't run into that a ton. The only time I run into that, honestly, is with some of the custom heads we're going to talk about next week. Some of them come intentionally with larger openings, so you can use some of this. So this is blue tack. This is like stuff that I think it's meant actually to put like posters on walls. You know, you kind of stick it on the wall and then put the poster there, as opposed to using tape or pins or something like that. But what you do with this is it's stretchy, okay? You just take a little bit of this tack, and what I would do is I just put it right on the head there, and I just spread it out a little bit. Get it, it's nice and sticky. And it comes right off. If I don't want to do it, it literally pops right off. Super easy. But then if I had a head that was a little loose, I can pop that on and it gives it a nice snug fit. So now I don't have to worry about that head popping off. Very, very simple to do, and a great thing to use if you've Dremeled a little bit too much on your head. Okay, so don't worry if you start Dremeling and you go too much, you can always recover from that. See if we have any questions about that. Mike says those kits are better economy-wise. Absolutely. Sarah saying, put your hand behind a focus. Yeah, I've tried that. It doesn't seem to work for me. I've tried a piece of paper there too and stuff. Daniel, how you doing? Nikki says, don't forget eye protection. Yeah, I should mention that. You should wear eye protection. I'm not going to lie, I don't. I have glasses, but even that, sometimes I actually take my glasses off because I wear glasses for distance. So when I'm working really close to stuff, they actually bother me, so I end up taking them off. But Nikki is right. You should wear eye protection when you do this because stuff does kick up. So that is a good way. If you're going to try this at home, kids, you should wear eye protection. Do as I say, not as I do. So MOTU, as I said, was one of the first lines that I really started customizing heads with. And it was a great time. When I first started doing this, it was kind of towards the end of Mattel's work with the MOTU line. So there were a lot of figures that were pretty clearanced that I was able to pick up pretty cheap. And as I said, I got a ton of them on eBay. So it was a really cheap way for me to get some heads to add to my figures. And I've got a bunch of them here that I'll show you, and you can see how they look. Because as I said, some of the heads I find to be too cartoony, but others I think work wonderfully. So this is a very, very early custom I did. I call this King Treadaway of the Kingdom of Little Falls. And I say that because if you actually look at this head, which is from a MOTU Eldor figure, it looks remarkably like Eric Treadaway from Four Horsemen Studios. See, I'm doing that and it's not working. It doesn't like really focus for me. I never can get that to work, but I digress. So this is a super easy head, and he's got a crown on. This crown is actually from a WWE figure. I don't watch wrestling. I'm going to talk about some wrestling figures tonight. I don't watch wrestling, but some of the parts are really, really good to use. But this is what the head looks like normally. And I put it on a Sir Galeron body. It's interesting because the crown, the metal on the top of his head is, I kid you not, a perfect match for the armor color of Sir Galeron to begin with. So I created this. This is kind of like one of my king figures in my version of the story. You know, there's a Kingdom of Little Falls, which, if you actually know, Four Horsemen Studios is in Little Falls, New Jersey. So I thought it was fun to actually name one of the kingdoms in my version Little Falls. And this is where King Treadaway, he hangs out there. This is another one that I did when the goblins, I got big into the goblins. So this is one that comes from an unnamed one figure. Now this one I actually did some customization work to. That Eldor head that I showed you, the King Treadaway, there's no customization work on this head at all other than Dremeling it. I Dremeled it to fit, and let me show you that actually. I'll pull the head off. You know, you can see that the hole there is much, much larger than what it started with, and that is from having Dremeled it. And now it fits on very, very nicely. And it's even, it's actually so satisfying when you pop it on. See if you can hear it. Now you probably can't hear that, but it's like a little snap. Oh, it's so satisfying. But that head went on. That's an early one I did. I didn't do any paint on it or anything, just Dremeled it and snapped it on. This is one where the unnamed one actually has blue ears and blue around his eyes and stuff. So I painted that to match the colors to make this kind of like goblin brute. It also uses a warrior body that I swapped out some regular feet on, gave those feet some dry brushing effects to match it to the rest of the body. And the green arms are from like an Orc Legion builder. But I put this guy together, but once again, this is just a MOTU head that's been Dremeled. And what's interesting is you can see there's blue tack on that neck post, because this is one that I went a little too deep on. It didn't have the snug fit I wanted, so I put that blue tack, just as I was talking about, to get that adhesion. What about a female? So here's a female head. This comes from, I think this was one of the Tila figures. This was actually a figure that I got the head, just the head, on eBay specifically to do this. I created this when I was doing a bunch of characters that were inspired by the Disney princesses. This was my version of Cinderella. I imagined her as kind of like a warrior female knight character, but looks really, really good, fits really, really well right on here. And once again, all of the figures I'm showing tonight, all of these are things I've shown in the past. If you go to my website at mythiccustoms.com, you can see better pictures of all of these things. I know that this scenario, this is still a learning process. I'm still playing around with different technologies. So figuring out ways to show things. At some point, I'm going to have a solution where I can actually kind of show images on screen while I'm talking. You can see the actual pictures that I had posted on my website in addition to what I have here. But for now, I think this at least gets you an idea of what we're talking about. After the show is done, check out the website and you can see much, much better pictures. Chris says, are you aware WWE Elite Heads work with Mythics? Yep, we're going to cover a lot of lines today, and some wrestling stuff is in there as well. Is that MOTU Origins? No, these are all old MOTU Classics figures. None of these are like 200X. These are all the Master Universe Classics type stuff. Walter said the unnamed one head works great. Yeah, the unnamed one, that figure, that's like the evil Orko. I talked about him a few weeks ago because I did my Goblin Pirate, and I said that I had a custom head from that. But that one comes with two heads actually, so you can actually get a couple looks. One of them is the one I just showed. There's another one that looks more like a wizard. I've used that one too. Another one here. So this is one that I did that I put right on an orc body, and there's no painting here. The green of this head, and I honestly, if Steve's still looking, he would know. I don't even remember the name of this character. I know it was one that came out in like a 200X inspired line. I remember actually backing that entire line just because I like the looks of them, but I couldn't remember what the name of this character was. But it's a really cool head. It's actually got these actual metal earrings, and it totally looked like a pirate to me. So I put it in with my pirate customs. And I'm waiting for someone to tell me what MOTU head this actually came from. But again, Dremeled it, popped it right on. If you're looking for some easy ones to do, there's absolutely no color customization on this. These limbs are from an Urku figure, and the color, and I keep in mind, I know an Urku is not an easy figure to come by these days, but the skin tone of the Urku in that head matched perfectly. Yeah, Walter says it's Whiplash's brother's clan. Yeah, I know it's similar. It's a similar character to, I guess, Whiplash. I couldn't, oh, is it? No, it's not Provis. That's the genie-looking guy. I can't remember it. I think those are all the MOTU ones. Oh, no, I have one more. So this is another one that I did. This is the last MOTU one I'll show. So this was a Jitsu head. And again, this one is one I did paint. So I did, to match the color of the head to, this was a Kador body. So to match the skin tone of Kador to the Jitsu head, the skin tones were off. So I did add some paint to that to create this kind of like Mongolian looking archer type character. So that's one. Super, super easy to do. This is a great way to get started. Look on eBay. You can find some loose MOTU heads, a little bit of dremeling, and you can completely change the way your characters look. I've seen a lot of people use different heads from the MOTU line on those Templars I mentioned earlier to get some variety there. Now, oh, there we go, Steve. I said I knew Steve would come through. This character's name is Ceratus. That's who he was, Ceratus. Yeah, and like I said, he was part of like a 200X inspired line. It was MOTU Classics, but it was very much 200X style designs. So another line that I see a lot of people asking about, and someone even commented earlier, was about Marvel Legends. Marvel Legends are great figures. They're super readily available. They're 20 bucks a piece. A lot of them come with second heads. And a lot of them, they go on clearance on Amazon for 10 bucks, and you can pick them up. They make great custom fodder for a lot of reasons. I've used a couple heads, but by and large, I have found Marvel Legends heads to be too small for Mythic Legions, including the 2.0 bodies. Now, that's my opinion. It's one that I think a lot of people share, because I do see people say that, but it is a case-by-case basis. There are some Marvel Legends that are a little larger that I do think work. I'm going to show a few of them in a minute, but by and large, I find them to be a little small for my taste. One of the first ones I did, this head actually came from a Sentry figure, and the Sentry figure is a little bit large to begin with. It's a little bit bulkier, so the head I thought worked well. And this was one of the first Angel customs I did. And I did this actually before the back adapters even existed. My wings, actually, the way that I did this is I drilled really small holes in the pauldrons, and I pegged the wings right into those pauldrons. And that's all of the Angels that I've done. That's actually how I attached the wings, because I did them all early on before the back adapters were even available. But same thing as in Masters of the Universe, these heads are just Dremeled out to make them easier to fit right on top of the head, the neck post. Super simple. That's a bigger one. I really like the way that looks. Now, what I see a lot of people wanting to do with Marvel Legends is use female heads. And this makes a lot of sense. So we don't have a ton of unhelmeted females in the line yet. We've got Gwendolyn and Delphina, who have the same head, just repainted. And then we've got a handful of them that are hooded. But outside of that, we don't have a lot of human heads. And Marvel Legends, as I said, they come with extra heads. There's one figure out right now, or if you can find it it's a Walgreens exclusive called the Cuckoos. It comes with 3 really cool heads. You can't display the figure with 3 heads. So, you're inevitably going to end up with a bunch of extra pieces. And you look at your Mythic Legion and you say, hey, these would be great on those. Those are the heads that I find to be a little small. So this is a figure I did a while back. I did a wave of like vampire hunters, and I clad them all in black and purple. I wanted them to actually look like the vampires, kind of wearing the garb of their enemies to blend in. And this particular character uses a head from a figure called Silk. So it's from like the Spider-Man Marvel Legends line. And I like the way it looks. I don't think it looks like too out of whack in terms of size-wise, but it's definitely not perfect. And this is the thing that I find. With the female heads, they're wearing armor, so you can kind of cheat that. And you can kind of say, well, their heads would look a little small anyway because they're in a suit of armor. And that works for me until you look at like an unhelmeted Gwendolyn or an unhelmeted Delphina. When you look at the size of that head, which you can argue might be too big, you can say that, hey, based on the helmeted version and the unhelmeted version, that helmet wouldn't fit on that head. That's an argument that I've heard. I happen to like the way the unhelmeted Mythic Legions heads look. That's the size that I now have in my head. So a lot of times when I see Marvel Legends heads, I find them to be too small. There are some you can absolutely use, but I don't think they're as, like MOTU, I think works almost across the board in terms of size-wise. I can't say the same thing for Marvel Legends. A couple people agreeing, saying, yeah, the Builder figure heads are a little bigger. Yeah, Builder figure heads, because those are bigger, they work. The Build-A-Figure Odin, which is the Allfather from an older line, that's one, he's back there somewhere. That's one that I've seen a lot of people use. That looks really good. There was a Marvel Legends Thor pack that looks good with Mythics. Yep, that's a cool set. The Angel that I showed earlier, they've actually, I said this head came from Sentry. They've actually redone this head for a couple versions of Thor. One was in the SDCC pack, and they've released them separately as well. So that head is actually pretty readily available. And that Thor that's separate comes with a cool cape you can use as well. I've used a Marvel Legends Destroyer Body for Bolthor. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. That works. Chris asking if I still have a Dark Angel with a Taskmaster head. I do have that. That's back there. That's not one I'm showing today. Leland asking about Marvel Select heads. I'm going to get right to that because I have a couple Marvel Selects in a minute here too. The last Marvel Legends figure that I'm going to show is actually this one. So this uses a Namor head, and this was a character. This is like my half-elf, kind of inspired by, if you've ever read the Dragonlance books, Tannis half-elven. He's got a beard. When I saw this head with the ears, obviously he's an Atlantean, but it looked elvish to me. So it worked really, really well to make a half-elf custom. And for whatever reason, I really like this head. I think this head works really, really well on this body. It doesn't seem out of scale to me. I think it looks really nice. That's my suggestion for Marvel Legends heads. One thing that I haven't started doing yet, but I've been seeing recently a lot of people using Marvel Legends hair, like taking some of the female hair pieces and pulling that off and putting that on some of the Mythic Legions hooded heads when they remove the head from the hood. So those heads that are inside the hoods are not meant to come out, but you can get them out. I'm going to do a show down the road all about how to remove pieces from Mythic Legions figures that aren't meant to be removed, like the heads from the hoods. So a little sneak there. I'm going to do that down the road. But I've seen people who remove the heads and use the hoods for something else, putting hair pieces on some of those heads. And those look actually really cool. I've seen some of that. I was like, wow, that looks excellent. But the heads themselves, I think, are give or take. I saw someone post one today, actually, where they used a Puma head on a Grisha body, and that looked really, really cool. So my takeaway with Marvel Legends, what I'll say to you is, do they work? Maybe. Not all of them scale properly, in my opinion, but you never know. Give it a shot. Marvel Select. So if you're not familiar, Marvel Select is a line of figures not by Hasbro. I think Diamond puts, I think that's what they call it, Select. Diamond Select puts them out. They're actually a little larger in terms of scale than Marvel Legends are. They're kind of too large for Mythic Legions. They're a little bit bigger, but there are definitely, because they scale, there are definitely some figures that I think you can use. One that I did was this one. So I made a bunch of Mythic Legions monk figures. And this monk actually is the first one I did. He uses a number of pieces from Marvel Select. Actually, his skirt piece and his lower arms, those all came from a Marvel Legends Doctor Strange. But his head, we're talking about heads today, his head is actually from a Guardians of the Galaxy Drax the Destroyer, not a movie version. So they did a whole bunch of like comic-y type versions. And this head had a lot of personality, in my opinion. So I got that. I obviously had to heavily repaint it to get it to work with the body I wanted. There's paint on this body. This is one that I did a fair amount of customization work. But the scale of the head, I felt worked really, really well, even with the really beefy Mythic Legions body, that torso. The last Marvel Select I'm going to show is actually this one. So this is a female dwarf that I did. Before, I know that now they've come out and they've got a Ragnar Stormforger. But before that one even came out, before we got that first female dwarf, that was something I really wanted. And for the record, I don't dig female dwarfs with beards. That's a pretty divisive thing I've found. A lot of people really think that female dwarfs should have beards. never been my thing, women with beards, so I like my female dwarves without the beards. But I was looking, when I wanted to make a female dwarf, I wanted a head. So many female action figure heads, they're so thin. You know, they're made to be heroic looking, and right or wrong, there are certain traditionally heroic features that we associate with female superheroes or female warriors, and they're usually pretty thin. I wanted a rounder, more fully fleshed out face, and I found this one. This is actually from a Marvel Select dagger figure. So there was a 2-pack of Cloak and Dagger, and this is the dagger figure from that wave. The little ponytail piece that comes down, that's something that I painted and glued on, and I did paint all of her hair and her face. Dagger comes with like a facial marking, so I had to paint over that. But this is another example of a Marvel Select piece that I think worked really, really well for Marvel Legends, for Mythic Legions and for this scale. We go back to questions real set. So Steve says, I say all the time, Mythic Legions have a certain aesthetic. If you want to keep that look, you have to keep those proportions. Big heads are part of the Mythic Legions look. It's a great point. You know, what Steve's talking about is the aesthetic of Mythic Legions, and not only that large head look, that is kind of part of what the line has, but I also would offer that. I'm going to talk next about WWE or wrestling figures. And when Steve talks about the aesthetic, I also think that the sculpt of the head itself plays a big role. I don't like using a lot of wrestling figure heads because I find the sculpts on them, the sculptures, to look very soft. Look, I'm not knocking the figures. They're made to be mass market figures sold in Targets and Walmarts. I get what they're trying to do. They're not trying to make Mythic Legions figures. The figures themselves, the sculptures themselves, they're not meant to have this high level of detail. But in my opinion, when I combine some of those softer sculptures with Mythic Legions, they stick out in a very poor way. So to Steve's point about keeping the the Mythic Legions aesthetic, I would say that across all of these. That's something, and that's something I've tried to do. When I do my customs, I try to do only as much work as is necessary to achieve the character design I want. And that may sound really obvious, but I don't think it is. And this is years of being a designer outside of this that have taught me that. It's so easy to over-design something, to keep pushing it and keep pushing it, and to go too far. Where, you know, you look at Mythic Legions and there's a certain amount of paint apps. They're incredibly detailed, but there's a certain amount that happen to them. They're painted a certain way. If you start doing paints on them that look wildly different than what we've seen in the line, that may be cool. That may be what you want to achieve. And if so, go for it. But it's going to look different than the other figures it's being displayed next to. And because I like my stuff to try to blend in as much as possible, I like my figures to look like they could have come from the factory. Len and I were just talking about this today. I try not to push it over the top, and I try to use add-on pieces that I think fit that aesthetic that Steve talked about. Great comment, Steve. Thanks for that. I'll take a quick drink here. Anthony and Nikki are both agreeing with me that there's no beards. Female dwarfs don't need beards, Mike says. I agree. So I was talking about wrestling figures. I have used a couple. Now, one thing I'm going to say here as well is I'm not a wrestling fan. I have never really been a wrestling. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, Hulkamania, I watched that. There was a period of time where I had some friends that were into it. I think they called it like the Attitude Era, where you had, you know, Mick Foley and Stone Cold Steve Austin. So I remember that era as well. But I haven't watched wrestling in, you know, 10 years or more, which is good because when I look at wrestling figures, if I find one that has a sculpture that I think does work, I don't know who the hell the characters are. So if I use one of those heads, it's not like I'm instantly going to say, oh, that's Hulk Hogan. I'm not going to use a Hulk Hogan head because I recognize it. It's the same reason why I wouldn't use Lord of the Rings heads. So Lord of the Rings is not a line we're going to look at today. I've talked about using Lord of the Rings figures for the last couple weeks. They're awesome figures to use for customs, but not the heads. I use their bodies, I use their weapons, I use lots of the pieces. I don't use the heads. I do think the heads are too small. That is number one. But even outside of that, I recognize the characters. If I put a Legolas head on, you know, an elf ranger over here or one of the elf figures, it's going to look like Orlando Bloom. It looks like that character. If I put an Aragorn head, it looks like Viggo Mortensen. I can't unsee those characters. That doesn't, and if you're really into wrestling, this may be a problem for you because you're going to say, hey, that's, John Cena, right? That's a wrestler. You're going to look at that and say, hey, that's John Cena. You're not going to look and say, hey, that's just, you know, a heroic looking knight or something like that. So that doesn't bother me. I don't know who these characters are to begin with. Here's one that I did that I really like a lot. And I talk about the sculpt. I said the sculpts are really, really soft. Every once in a while, they have some that the sculptures are so good, so detailed. They really, in my opinion, fit in. This was one, and I do happen to know the character's name is like Seamus. And I only know that because I've bought figures of him before. But this was one that I really liked. And I did do some paint work. I put it on an Adamant body to make him, this is one of my Highland barbarians. I have a whole series of barbarians that are, as opposed to being more Viking, they're a lot more Celtic inspired. This is one that I have like that I really like a lot. Had to Dremel it a little bit and put that on, but that really, really worked for me. So the great thing about the wrestling lines is there's a ton of them. There are so many figures out there. If it's not going to bother you to have heads on of those characters, if you're not going to instantly associate with that with the heads with who they really are, this could definitely be a good way for you to get unhelmeted heads on your figures. WWE also did a line a couple years ago that I'm going to speak more about in a future episode called Create a Superstar. These particular figures were meant to be modular. They were meant to be popped apart and have swappability in different pieces. There's some really, really cool parts in that line to use that I'm going to cover at another time, but I'm going to look at one of the heads today. They did a head for Undertaker. Undertaker's someone I know. He's been around for a long time. I don't know if he's still around, but whatever. This is turning into like a wrestling conversation. I'm not comfortable with that. But they did an Undertaker set, and it came with like a Frankenstein head. And I really, really like using that Frankenstein head as my flesh golem. Actually, this arm here, that's actually from the same set, and it plugs right in. That's one of the things I'll talk about down the road. But this Frankenstein head that came with it, it's obviously not meant to be Undertaker. It was meant to go with the set itself. That worked really well for a Frankenstein-like flesh golem. Now, in all honesty, this actually isn't the head from the set. I used to have that head on this figure, but then there was a customizer and painter named Kurt Daniels who offered this same head with his custom paint job, and I liked it so much I ended up picking it up and swapping out the factory head with one that he had painted. As I said, next week we're going to talk about customizing, like 3D printed heads and cast heads and stuff like that. And Kurt is one customizer whose work I'm going to look at. But those are a couple of wrestling figures that I've used along in the past. Mike says, I just gave him an idea, a custom Mankind tribute. Yeah, when that little period of time I did watch wrestling, I did like Mick Foley. He was always my favorite. I've met Mick Foley actually before. He's a funny guy. Walter saying Sheamus is a great guy in character look, real life barbarian. Yeah, he looked really good. And again, there's other figures I've seen of him that I don't think the sculptures stand up to this line, but that particular one, I don't remember which wave it's from, but that particular one I really liked a lot. Other lines, let me see what else I have here. Oh, another line that you're probably going to bump into is Warcraft. So there have been a few Warcraft lines over the years, and like MOTU, it's a fantasy line. It fits really well with this aesthetic. The figures don't all fit. First off, the figures are largely statues, so there are some figures where you're going to have a really hard time even getting the head off. A lot of times they are posed in such incredibly dynamic ways that the head won't fit on this anyway. But there are some that I think work really, really well. If you look on my website, you'll see some of the ones I've used in addition to what I'm showing here today. This is one. There was actually a goblin, a Warcraft goblin, and originally this guy was riding like a big rocket. Okay, I pulled the figure off the rocket and I popped the head right off. Pulled the head right off, dremeled it a little bit, popped it on this body. His actual gloves too, the gloves that he's wearing are actually from that exact same set, which I liked because that gave this was my goblin miner. And actually his backpack, he's got a backpack with a shovel and some dynamite. That came from a different Warcraft figure. But that head I thought worked really, really well. As I've said before, I love the goblins. So this was me in my quest to find as many different goblin looks as I could find. But no paint on that head. It's green, matched really well with the rest of the body. The neck's a little bit different color green, but it's so hidden that it didn't bother me. That's Warcraft, and that's from the line. I don't even know who did it. They were large figures, really, really big, really, really heavy. Some of them go for a lot of money. I've tried to pick up lots of them over time. Sometimes you can find lots, especially if you find them broken. Because they're statues, they're somewhat fragile. If they fall off a shelf, they end up breaking in a lot of ways. I've found a bunch of people selling broken Warcraft figures, which works great because I'm going to break them anyway. So I've used a bunch of different Warcraft figures for stuff. That's just one of them. Here's another one from that same line. This is like a dwarven hero that I did. And his axe and shield, that's actually from I think it was Uncle Jim or something. That's a customizer that sold that here on the Cabal and on eBay that I picked up, and I did the paints. But this particular head, this is an example of the Warcraft aesthetic. His beard is insanely flowing. Like it actually looks a little ridiculous. It's so flowing as opposed to kind of hanging down. Because that's the Warcraft aesthetic, I kind of had to accept that. And I still think it works pretty well. I like it. But really easy stuff. Dremel that. Another example here. This is actually from an older Warcraft line. I did some paint on this to turn this one into like a dark dwarf, I think it's called Durgar. But Warcraft is another one you're going to probably run into. So far we've covered Masters of the Universe, Marvel Legends, WWE or wrestling figures, and Warcraft. In my opinion, those are probably the most common lines that you are going to run into when it comes to adding extra heads to your figures. But there's a ton of obscure lines that I'm going to look at in a few minutes. I'm going to look at some questions first to see what people are chatting about. Yeah, Leland saying Muradin Bronzebeard. That's the name of this, the dwarf with the big flowing beard. His name was Muradin Bronzebeard. That's where I found him. And actually, the face piece that comes down, it was actually originally a crown. I pulled it off and flipped it so it would look more like battle armor as opposed to a crown, because I didn't want to make him a king. I already had a dwarven king. So other toy lines that you can use. Honestly, any 6-inch line, look at it. It might have some pieces that you can use, but some really obscure lines that I've stumbled into that I think are cool. I stumbled into one called Shadowrun. And you've probably seen these on the Cabal and stuff. A couple people have used these in the past. I posted these a long, long time ago. I don't know a ton about the line. There was like a gaming component to it. I want to say, I think WizKids might have released the line a number of years ago. It's really weird. It's a combination of like fantasy, but in like modern times. Like they have like orcs in like suits and stuff. It's a bizarre, bizarre line. But there's a couple dwarf figures that are in that line that I think work really, really well. The first one of those is, it was like a dwarven engineer, and I put this kind of dwarf miner character together out of it, but the head works really, really well. It's a really, really cool head. This is one that I had a bit of a hard time. getting to attach. I didn't want to Dremel it. The hole there wasn't working for me. I actually ended up using a magnet. There's actually a little magnet that actually a little screw that I screwed in to the body there. And then I glued this little magnet and it actually just magnets right on and it totally fits. It's just kind of a trick that I did for this particular one because it worked in this case. That's kind of a trick. As the more you do this stuff, you pick up little tricks like that. You try different things out. But this was one, like I said, from a line called Shadowrun. And what was cool about this one is this particular character, like I said, he was like a little engineer. He had some technology type element to him. And he came with this little like spider robot that had a helmet. And I looked at that helmet and I said, hey, that's really cool. I wonder if I could use that for a head. So I ended up ripping it off. And what I did was I made this like little goblin soldier out of it. And it's tough to see, but that head actually, the bottom part of that head is a Orc Legion builder. I pulled the helmet off the Orc Legion builder. And if you've ever done that, what's underneath it is kind of weird looking, because the lower part is meant to be exposed on the figure. So you see the jaw and the teeth, but the whole top part that hides under the helmet, it just looks weird because it's not meant to be removed. But I was able to glue this helmet on top of that odd looking head to create this kind of weird looking goblin soldier. And he's got like a big long nose. It almost looks like a mosquito. I actually called him Private Flea. Kind of a little play on the character of Beetle Bailey, Private Flea. That's what I called him. And again, I know I've said it a few times, but all of these customs are available to view better pictures of on my website at mythiccustoms.com. The last figure I'll show you from Shadowrun is this one right here. This is another dwarf figure, and just Dremeled the head, popped it right on to this Joran Runeshaper body. Joran, being a wizard dwarf, it never really worked for me that he was wearing this heavy plate armor. So I actually put the Joran head on a different body to make more of like a wizard type dwarf. And so I had this body left over, and the blue chainmail on the top of the head here seemed to match really well with this. So this is my like little kind of like classic dwarven knight character. So Shadowrun, I'm expecting that there are going to be some people that watch this, whether they catch the rebroadcast or not, that are going to go look for some of this stuff after. Shadowrun is the name of that figure. I'm actually not sure of the name of the characters themselves, but if you do a Google search for just, Shadowrun action figures, you'll see the different figures that were available. There's actually a couple like larger figures in that wave too that I've never gotten my hands on them. I've seen them for sale many times. I've just never picked one up. So those might actually work cool too as well. It's a pretty interesting line. What else can you pull stuff from? There was a line that I believe NECA did a couple years back called Dragonage. I have to assume it's based on a video game. Again, not only do I not watch wrestling, I don't play video games. So I don't know if it's from a video game or not, but I'm going to assume so. But a number of people have used this in the head in the past too. They had a figure called Genlock that makes another really, really great goblin. In this particular one, his robe he has on here is from a Star Wars Black Series Kylo Ren, the same one that I showed last week when I showed using the bottom of that Kylo Ren on one of my Mythic Shogun Samurai figures. Here's another use of it. This black robe from that same figure I used here. This lower piece here is actually, I wanted to look like kind of dirty and dingy. That's from a Lord of the Rings figure. And honestly, that axe, I think, came from a Prince of Persia figure. I end up with weird stuff in my fodder bin sometimes that I pick up at shows, and sometimes I don't even know where it's from. Like later on, I'll see a figure holding it. I'm like, oh, that's where I got that toy. But this had this Genlock head, great, creepy looking little figure. The Dragonage line had 4 figures in it. There's another one called Duncan. That's a like heroic looking, almost looks like an Aragorn Ranger type character, bearded, ponytail. I've used him to create a bard. That one looks pretty cool too. But that Genlock one is makes a great goblin. And actually, it comes with a really cool axe, so you can use that for your figures as well. And I've even used the body itself. I don't have it out here on my table, but I actually used the body of the Genlock with a head from the Marvel Legends Build-A-Figure Collapsidian, and I glued a pair of goblin ears onto Collapsidian and put that on that body and made a big, beefy, extra goblin. I think I called it a cave goblin. But I have that down there now on my website as well. So it's always great. I used every piece of Genlock. It's always super cool when you can use every single piece of a figure for a custom. Okay. One line that is actually pretty common, and there's a ton of figures, but I don't do a ton with, so I didn't cover it in detail, but I'll show one figure, is the DC lines, specifically some of the weird looking aliens from Green Lantern. They can make some really cool like demon figures. So this particular head, goat looking demon skull, and I've seen a number of people doing casts of this figure as well. We're going to talk about casts next week. I've mentioned in the past that, you know, whenever possible, I try to buy the actual heads versus a cast head of something. I think that they're better quality. There is also an ethical kind of component to it. You know, obviously, someone worked hard to produce this toy. To just cast that head, there's some ethical concerns about that. Not saying I haven't done it, but whenever possible, I do try to get the original heads. That's what this is. This came in a 2-pack with another crazy looking alien. And just like I said with MOTU heads, people customize them. People don't use the extra heads. They end up selling them. You can find the same thing with the DC Green Lantern lines. You can find a lot of these heads loose on eBay for pretty cheap money. And it worked really, really well to create this crazy looking demon guy. I've used a couple of the other heads on demons as well, and they work really well. I also used one. There was an Aquaman figure I used. I showed my angel earlier. I did another angel that used the one of the Aquaman heads that I think worked really well. So the DC line, they're a little bit larger, and actually the Four Horsemen worked on a lot of those figures as well. That head that I just looked at on that demon, that's one I believe they worked on. So just like I said with MOTU, there feels like there's a bit of a connection there. So the last line that I have to look at today is a line from a figure called Stan Winston's Blood Wolves. So Stan Winston, obviously famous, you know, creature effects, special effects artist. There's a number of lines that have come out over the years with figures based on his work. The one you probably may have run into is Realm of the Claw. I've used some Realm of the Claw figures in the past. When I showed my Black Panther custom that used a Taurian body last week, people were asking where the feet came from, and I said they came from a Stan Winston Realm of the Claw figure. That's one I've used. But what I'm going to look at today is he did a line called Blood Wolves. They're not easy to find. I'm not going to lie. They're pretty challenging to find regularly, but there's one particular figure in that line called Veridicus. Veridicus was like a werewolf knight, and it comes with 2 heads, both of which are awesome. So one of the heads is this one here, and it's, you know, it's a kind of a short snout werewolf, not the long snarling snout. But I like that look there. To be honest, this head isn't even attached. Because of the neck collar and the way this head is, I didn't even have to Dremel it. For a while, I had the Veridicus figure, and I wasn't sure if I was going to put this back on it, because sometimes it goes for some good money. I was like, do I want to ruin it? But I ended up cannibalizing it for other stuff anyway. But this head is honestly just resting there, and the tightness of the collar actually just holds it in place, so it displays really, really good. But as cool as that head is, I actually really liked the other head it came with. So it also came with this head right here, this cool knight head, and the visor actually flips open to show this really cool werewolf looking head underneath that. Super, super super cool. And I put that on a knight body. Just love the way that looks. And actually the loin piece he's got there, that came from that same Veridicus figure as well. Fits really well. This is one that I did Dremel to get on top of the head. Well, actually, one other thing I'll show you. This is another one that I did that I found. The Hellboy line, the movie Hellboy line, one of the figures I grabbed from that was this Rasputin. And that was one that literally, I talked about adding a head to a Templar to change that look up. Boom. Little bit of Dremel on that head, put it on there. You totally have an unhelmeted Templar to go with your display. Super, super easy. And there's a lot of figures like that. There's a lot of lines where they might have one or two figures in that line that you can bring into your display. That's one of the things that I definitely know I do well with. I actually, at one of the first toy cons I went to, I met a fellow Mythic Legions collector named, drawing a blank now, totally drawing a blank on what his name was. Oh, that's so embarrassing. Anyway, I met a fellow Mythic Legions, Dustin Carter. I met Dustin, and he gave me a compliment that I thought was so cool, where he said he was a big fan of my work, and I thanked him for that. But he said, you have me hunting down some of the weirdest, most obscure toy lines I've ever found just to recreate some of your recipes. And I thought that was super, super cool. I've collected for so many years. I've had so many different figures through my hands that I find a lot of different parts, and I remember things that will work. If I decide I want to do a werewolf, I'll say, hey, I remember seeing some werewolf figures from Stan Winston. Let me hunt those down. That particular figure, by the way, if you're going to go look for that, if you look on eBay, you will find people selling him for like $150. Be patient. They pop up every now and again for a lot cheaper than that. My buddy Joe Vasapolo, he hooked me up with that. He picked it up at a toy show for me. He probably paid 20, 25 bucks for it. I've seen them go for similar prices, like 20, 25 bucks on eBay. So don't pay crazy money for a Blood Wolves Veridicus. If you're patient, you can find one. But look up different figures. Go to toy shows. Go to collectible shops and just walk around and see the different figures they have. Look on the backs of the packages and say, oh, they don't have this figure, but I'm going to go and look on eBay for it. Because there's a ton of obscure lines and cool heads out there that you can do stuff like this with. And you can create incredible variety. Probably half the figures I showcased tonight, and I know that tonight was very much a show and tell kind of night, but I think that is a good way to show how you can use so many different lines for stuff like this. Probably half of the figures I showed tonight, there was no paint on those heads. There was just some dremeling and popping it on. That's it. So even if you're not comfortable with painting yet, even if you're working up toward that, this is a great first step to start adding some variety to your Mythic Legions figures. Cool? Is that helpful? Hopefully I showed you some stuff that you didn't, you hadn't seen before. Do you epoxy sculpt to change the head a bit? I have, Sarah. I've used epoxy sculpt to make like beards on stuff. Oddly enough, I was going to show, one of the things I was going to show is a Marvel Legends head and how it's a little bit smaller than some of the other heads. I mean, you look, this is a Black Knight head and this is the vampire head. I mean, this is supposed to be a helmeted character and it's smaller than the vampire Carpathia's head. But that head in particular, I actually did use this on a body, and oddly enough, it worked. And I sculpted a beard on him. And so I used epoxy sculpt for that. But by and large, I don't do a lot of sculpting. Nikki says, yeah. Oh, okay. Travis and Nikki having some fun. Lee saying, Stan Winston's figures are great. Blood Wolves and Extreme Gargoyles were my favorites. Realm of the Claw was good too, but those were fantastic. Yeah, the Extreme Gargoyles are super expensive. Those are ones that, goodness, if you want to pick those up, I never see those go super cheap. Those are very, very pricey. Mutant Earth, that's another line. I haven't seen those go expensive, but I've never really seen anything in there that worked really, really well. I used one of the swords for one of the figures on my Oni custom, but not the heads. Realm of the Claw, I actually just got a lot of Realm of the Claw figures from Travis today. As soon as I got them in, I started pulling them apart. Lots of great pieces you can use on those. Heads are too big. Heads are definitely too big for Mythic Legions. Travis says, I sold that figure. Which figure? Veridicus? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, Joe saying it was a steal. Yeah, Joe hooked me up when he contacted me from the show, and he's like, hey, they have one of these here. It's like $20. Do you want it? I was like, oh, yes, please. That's what's great about being in a group like the Cabal, and I knew Joe before the Cabal. We actually met at G-Con the first year, but collecting friends in the community, it's so helpful to get some of these parts. Joe saying Gargoyle set me for 700. Oof, yeah, those are expensive figures. So that's what I wanted to present tonight. Like I said, next week in part 2, we're gonna look at 3D printed heads from My Action Figure Customs, from Shapeways, different people that are doing stuff with those. We're also going to look at some of the cast heads that have come out over time and the differences there, because I definitely have some thoughts on those and what I think works and how to work with those. Because when you get those heads, some of them are painted. They do come painted occasionally. They're all hand painted. They're all custom painted as opposed to these factory painted ones. But there are some things to know about, and I know people have a lot of questions. So I'll be happy to answer those questions on next week's show. But for this week, that's what I had to present. So, if anyone has any questions, any things you want me to talk about, let's do so. I got a few more minutes before I wrap this up. Any questions that people have about Mythic Legions, about customizing, or about any of the stuff that I talked about tonight? Thank you once again for everyone for joining. Wednesdays have quickly become one of my favorite nights of the week. I very much look forward to this, and it warms my heart to hear other people saying similar things, saying like when Anthony tells me that him and his family are, it's Wednesday night, we're going to watch, Mythic Conversations. That makes me so happy. I'm a family man myself. I've got 2 kids, so I know, and my son is actually a Mythic Legions collector. He comes to ToyCon and comes to Legions Con with me. Actually, on that, I had a couple long conversations with Joe Viteri, Lord Veteris, about ToyCon in June and about Legions Con in November today. A lot of cool stuff. Obviously, the June ToyCon show, Horseman will be there. I will be there. I'll be there both days, hanging out, meeting people. So if you want to come down and hang out with me, please do so in June. We won't have a big Legions Con thing going on in June. We're saving that for November, but there's going to be some cool stuff. Even like the Legionnaire lunch they did at ZoloCon. I was talking to Anthony this week and saying, hey, we should definitely do something like that, at ToyCon. I mentioned it to Walter as well. It's cool. I mean, I talk to people from this group all week, sometimes about, specific business related things, whether it's Legions Con or talking to Walter about, the Cabal and moderating and stuff like that. Sometimes it's just sharing love of the line. Nikki and I were going back and forth about some different customizing things this week. It's very, very cool to be able to do that and, not only have this once a week. Walter said, thanks for the show. Absolutely. Travis, what possesses someone to shave off a beautiful beard? My wife very much enjoys my nice smooth skin, so I had to listen to the boss. Thanks for sharing tips. Absolutely, I'm happy to do so. That being said, actually, I haven't said this. I do have a list of things I want to cover. If you have something that you'd like me to talk about, feel free to reach out to me. Just message me through the Cabal or through Facebook, whatever. Message me and let me know what topics you'd like me to cover. I can't guarantee that I will get to them immediately, but it's certainly something that I will consider talking about because ultimately I want this to be content that you find enjoyable, that you find valuable. So if you want me to talk about it, let me know. Luis said that he will be there. Yeah, Luis, if you haven't checked it out yet, yesterday on Source Horseman, I posted a customizing corner article on Luis's customs. Absolutely stunning stuff. I met him for the first time at Legions Con last year. Blew me away with his work and his enthusiasm. He was so excited to be there as an exhibitor. He did a lot of stuff. He really brought his A game, and he's already been telling me that he's going to go even better this year. He's going to have even more stuff to show, even cooler stuff to show at Legions Con too, so I'm excited for that. Steve says, painted a figure for Trav while listening to your sweet voice. Yeah. That figure has my voice. Just, I'm sure that helped. I'm sure that helped really bring the creativity out for you to paint that figure. You're welcome, Trav. Legions Con 2020 shirts. You know what? I don't know. I don't know if people would wear. Do you want a Legions Con shirt? Like, Cabal shirts I get. I totally get Cabal shirts. My concern with making Legions Con shirts is, like, we made the Cabal shirts and we did it pre-order. So we shipped out all the pre-orders, and we had a handful of extras that we bought to Legions Con. We sold them at Legions Con, and then we sold a handful of them afterwards. I didn't have a problem having extra Cabal shirts because I knew they would go. I feel like once Legions Con is done, no one's going to, like, if you're there, you'll be like, hey, I'll buy this shirt. But if you're not there, who's going to want a shirt to an event they didn't go to? I don't know. That's my thought. If you actually would want Legions Con shirts, message me that you would want one it's in November. It's not going to be for a while, but it's certainly something that I'll talk to Joe about. Joe says we should go axe throwing after the show. So Joe, a lot of people have been talking about, actually, I just realized. I don't know if, Joe, if you're talking about going after Legions Con in November or Toy Con in June. Toy Con in June, maybe. My concern with Legions Con after party, we've been talking about that, and should we do a get together after? I got to tell you, Legions Con is going to be different this year. Last year, Legions Con went from 5 o'clock to like 8. And so it was after Toy Con. So people literally, a lot of people got to Toy Con for before 9 o'clock for the doors open. They hung around all day, and then we did Legions Con. Legions Con 2 is going to be different. We're still working everything out, but it's going to be longer. It's probably going to run the same time as Toy Con, but it's going to go a little later. So it's not going to be as much waiting around, waiting for stuff to happen. There won't be programming for the full 8 hours, but there's going to be a lot of programming to do all the panel discussions we want to do some of the customizing workshops. We need some time. So my concern with doing something after Legions Con is I think a lot of us are going to be wiped out. It's going to be just a long day. So I'm kind of being a little cautious about making plans afterwards. We're going to be all together all day. I guarantee there are going to be some fans that decide to go hang out afterwards. After last year, I know, Joe, you were really sick, so you couldn't come out. A bunch of us just went next door and got something to eat and have a few beers, and that was actually pretty enjoyable. So we'll see, though. Walter said getting some made. I assume he's talking about T-shirts. Yeah, don't forget, Walter, Sunday mornings for him, afternoons for me over here on the East Coast. Walter does his ramblings of a madman, so check in. If you enjoy these live videos, check out Walter on Sundays. I have a couple announcements to wrap up with in a minute. Yeah, a lot of love for ZoloCon, for Lewis. ToyCon in June for sure. Yeah, ToyCon. I'm super excited. I think I'm actually gonna. Usually I do one day of ToyCon. Usually I just drive up Saturday morning, do it on Saturday, and then come home. I usually leave kind of early on Saturday, like afternoon. I think I'm gonna actually drive up Saturday morning. I've got work to do there with Joe that runs the show to plan out Legions Con. I'm going to be, with the Horsemen that day, and I'm going to be hanging out and meeting people too. But I think I'm going to stay overnight. So I think I'm going to stay overnight so I can be there all day Saturday, maybe do some stuff afterwards on Saturday night if anything's going on, and then come back to the show on Sunday as well. Yeah, Nikki said it was exhausting. I mean, Nikki, she came in the night before. She came in the night before Legions Con, and it was a late night for her. But other people like Walter and Dennis, they came in morning of. This year I think a lot of people are talking about getting there the day before so they can get situated and get ready for the next day, because we're going to probably be looking at a little bit of an earlier setup. And we'll talk about it. I know that I'm going to go up the night before. I'm going to go up on the Friday, and hopefully if some of my fellow exhibitors are hanging around, if we're all in the area, we maybe can hang out and go to dinner the night before we're all absolutely exhausted. And Nikki, I promise I am not going to stay at that same hotel again. I felt so bad. Funny little story. So the first time I went to this area of Jersey, I stayed at a Ramada Inn that was not too far from the Horseman studio, and it was fine. It was totally fine place. It was inexpensive. It was clean. The breakfast was actually pretty good. So when Nikki was coming down, she said, "Hey, do you have any recommendations for a hotel?" And I said, "Yeah, it was a really nice Ramada that I stayed at before." And I mean, I stayed there too. This second time, I actually booked the same hotel. It was horrible. It was so bad. It was under new management, and it was just, I felt so guilty. I actually convinced Nikki and Steve to stay there. And when I got there and saw how horrible this hotel was, I was just like, oh my, I said, "Nikki, I'm so sorry." And she laughed it off. She's like, "Oh, I've stayed at worse," which I'm sure there are worse. I mean, there wasn't like murder and blood on the floor, but it not much far removed. It was bad. So I'm not staying there this time. So Leland said, hard being a toy vendor there as well, trying to make it to Legions Con after. Yeah, I mean, this is going to go on during, Legions Con is going to go on during Toy Con. So, that's something that we're going to have to figure out. There's going to be like a marketplace area in the Legions Con. So there might be obviously certain vendors, maybe yourself, that want to be in that area so you can be closer to the action. But I mean, ultimately, we're trying to plan a bigger day. We've got a lot that we want to do. It's not going to lend itself to just being an after hours thing anymore. Anthony, I'm working while working on action figure posing. Awesome. Yeah, Walter said the place I was at was great. I told Walter to stay at the same place, and he accidentally booked a different one. So Walter must have known something. Steve's laughing because Steve was at the hotel. There was no bed bugs. They're saying, was there bed bugs? Thankfully, there wasn't that. There was no bed bugs. The breakfast, though, the first time I stayed there was a nice continental breakfast. They had a waffle bar, and they had like eggs and sausage and all kinds of pastries. This time, they had like 10 slices of wheat bread, like an apple and a banana, like one apple and a banana, and like maybe half a dozen mini donuts in a waffle maker. It was ridiculous. They kept running out of coffee. It was so bad. So Joe's on. So Joe's saying Legions Con will extend well beyond Toy Con. Yeah, absolutely. That's what we've been talking about. A lot of people like the after party feel of Legions Con. So we're going to do that as well, but a longer day, more time to hang out and be in the booth, not as much downtime, a lot of time to do some panel discussions, to see some cool presentations. We haven't announced what those panel discussions are going to be yet. I will tell you that the Horsemen are saying they're going to do one. So they're going to do a panel discussion at Legions Con for us. And if everything goes according to plan, maybe we'll even see some cool reveals and some cool new things at Legions Con this year. It's all up in the air. It's a long time away, but that's what we're hoping for. But it will also extend past Toy Con. Toy Con ends at 5. It's going to extend past that, so there will still be that after party type feel of all of us hanging out. Because that was honestly the coolest part last year. It's just everyone hanging out. By the way, as I scroll through these, if I ever miss your question, it's hard to keep up with some of these, so don't be offended if I don't answer your question specifically. Sometimes I actually go back afterwards and I look at all the comments I missed and I reply to them. Travis, why are you talking about Legions Con? I mean, are you coming to Legions Con? Are you coming, Travis? Come on. Is Legions Cast going to be there in full? Everyone should tell Travis that he has to make it out to Legions Con, because we don't want to have Legions Con without Travis Bowles. Well, I've gone through all the comments. I presented what I want to present. It's 9:06 now, so we're right over an hour and a half. That's about where I keep it. I've got a couple announcements to wrap up this week. Let's see what I've got here. So my Saturday sale, I always end this with my for sale Saturday, a little teaser. This week is going to actually be, it's actually one I did a while ago. I just am getting around to posting it now. It's a little bit of a tribute figure. It's a female barbarian. Oddly enough, it actually uses a head from one of the lines I talked about tonight. Cool female barbarian. So if that's something you're into, check me out. I always post it around 10 o'clock on Saturdays here on the Cabal. My last two for sale Saturdays sold like immediately. So if you do want something, I only do one, so you got to get it fast. Action figure adventure. It ends in less than, at this point, it's probably less than 24 hours. This is a Kickstarter. If you haven't looked this up yet, as soon as this broadcast is done, go do so. Go to Kickstarter and look up Action Figure Adventure. This is going to be an awesome docu-series about toy collecting, about toy hunting. Super cool guys that are running this. When I looked earlier today, they were right under. They're trying to get, they've already beaten their goal, so this thing is fully funded. They're trying to get to $10,000 so they can do an extra episode of the show. The show is already going to be broadcast. This is to get DVDs and Blu-rays. Super cool guys. Four Horsemen Studios are going to be involved in this. They've filmed a bunch of interview footage at the studio with those guys talking about toys. I can let you know that they're actually going to interview me as well. I'm going to be meeting up with them in a few weeks to talk to them about some of the stuff that I do. So not only do you get Four Horsemen, you also get me on there as well. Check it out. I'm really excited about this. Really fun. They got some really cool stuff, and it's not a big pledge to get a DVD or even a digital download or something. So check it out. There's less than 24 hours left, I believe. Time is out. You got to get it. If you want to back this, you got to do it now. Go to Kickstarter and look at Action Figure Adventure. And if you do, tell them that you heard about it on the Mythic Legions Cabal and that Jeremy sent you. What else do we got? So next week, we're going to look at, like I said, the 3D heads and talk more about kind of continue this conversation. Until then, thank you all very much. You can check me out online at mythiccustoms.com and on Instagram as the username Mythic Customs. And as always, I'll be posting here in the Cabal, and I will see everyone next week for another episode of Mythic Conversations. Thanks all. Good night.